This is episode 39 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Catherine Roberts-Parker and I'm a PhD candidate in Shakespeare Studies at the University of Sydney. I'm currently writing a thesis titled Words and Music, a study of the cultural significance of ballad singing in Elizabethan and Jacobean comedy. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
When that happened, one of the most successful companies in London, sanctioned by the Crown to perform, found themselves homeless suddenly.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
When we think of William Shakespeare, we almost inextricably tie him to the Globe Theatre, and we forget that William Shakespeare was actually hugely innovative in the theater industry as a whole. During this time period of his life in 52 Years on Earth was the first time the world was seeing purpose-built theaters at all, and William Shakespeare was at the forefront of it, which is why it should come as no surprise that William Shakespeare was involved in building the first indoor theater, the Blackfriars. We sometimes forget that Shakespeare's plays were performed at an indoor theater, and that he and his longtime business partner, Richard Burbage, established the then risky venue, the Blackfriars, for the first time in the world. With the only accurate replica of the Blackfriars that exists today, no one knows the history of theater better than the American Shakespeare Center, which is why we've asked Sarah Enloe, the director of education at the American Shakespeare Center, to visit with us today and take us behind the curtain to look at the history of Shakespeare's lesser known, but equally as innovative, indoor theater, the Blackfriars. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cassidy.
Why was Shakespeare's indoor theater called Blackfriars?
Well, it's actually fairly simple. It was housed in the monastery or former monastery of the Dominican monks, which are the guys who wore black cloaks. So they were the Blackfriars. Of course, Henry VIII is the one who took those monasteries away from the Catholic Church and then was able to convey them to people who would pay him for them. So that's why James Burbage was able to actually buy property in what used to be a holy place.
So they converted it to a theater. It wasn't built for that purpose at the time.
No, it wasn't built. When it was built in the 13th century, it was built probably as sort of the dining hall of the friars. And it was used in various ways throughout its history. For instance, when Henry VIII was trying to get a divorce from his first wife, the Blackfriars was the venue for the court proceedings because it was one of the biggest inside or interior spaces in the city of London.
Now, as I understand it, Richard Burbage inherited this theater from his father, James, and it was actually the second Blackfriars. Was there a first?
The first Blackfriars was inhabited by the boys from the choristers, you may recall from the period, and one of their teachers actually leased it and used it at a time when there was a height for that kind of entertainment. And so the first Blackfriars was actually used for a boys group. And then it was closed for a few years, and James Burbage came in and did some remodeling, and he began to use it as an indoor, well, he wanted to use it as an indoor theater. He wasn't actually allowed to move in because the neighbors didn't want all the trouble with the traffic in the afternoon.
So that may explain why there was such a gap, because he inherited the theater in 1597, but he didn't actually form his company of owners until 1608, which is like a decade later. Why is that? Why he waited so long? Is because there was litigation, I guess?
Yeah, there was a problem with the neighborhood not wanting a theater in that location. So he was not able to use it. Of course, James passed away shortly after the problems arose and after he had done all of the remodeling and kind of sunk the family's fortunes into that, looking forward to all of the money that it would bring them. When that happened, it was kind of a dire time for the whole family because their outdoor space, the theater, was under problematic situation due to the landlord not being willing to re-up the lease immediately for the same term. And so one of the most successful companies in London, sanctioned by the Crown to perform, found themselves homeless suddenly. So while James was working to figure out what to do with the Blackfriars, his brother, Cuthbert, was working on the lease of the theater and was eventually, it seems, able to get an extension on that lease and then able to use the relationship that the family had with the Curtain, which is right next door to the theater, to play there for a little while. And eventually Richard was able to lease the Blackfriars to another boys group who inhabited it for quite some time until 1607, 1608, when they played something that did not fit well with the Master of Revels or the supervisors of theater, and they were forced to get out, which actually opened up an opportunity for the Globe folks to then come into the Blackfriars and run it as their winter or private playhouse for the next several years.
Well, that Shakespeare Girl newsletter subscribers will remember the theater map of 1600 London that shows the Blackfriars Theater is located almost directly across the river from the Globe. And part of the Globe's history was that they moved it outside of London proper, in part because of some of these issues. Why would they put so much investment into a theater like Blackfriars, which would require them to come back into London and deal with all of that for this second theater?
I think your listeners probably know that what we're talking about here are liberties or outside of the city walls. So within the city walls, a piece of property like a former monastery would operate under different laws than the rest of the city of London, just as the theater or the Globe on the other side of the river would be able to operate under a different set of rules. So it was really an advantage for a playhouse or a company to operate inside the city walls of London in the time of shorter days, winter, right? That is because there were curfews and there were gate closures and things like that. So even before the Blackfriars was available, James Burbage asked his patron to see if his company could secure a place in an inn to play in the winter time. When that wasn't possible because they were denied the privilege, that's when he started getting interested in the Blackfriars. He purchased it, he did the remodel, and then was ready to go with it, and then wasn't able to. So they were looking for an ability to play inside the city walls for the whole of from when James Burbage was looking around 1594, 1595. He purchased it in 1596 and then was hoping to play in it and didn't get to. The rules of London being what they were made having a winter playhouse a really exciting and advantageous thing for any company that was going to be interested in continuing to make money and work during the winter.
So this is really kind of an example of, I think of this group of people as having a great deal of tenacity. And it's like you said, they went and applied for, an inn or something that was readily available. And then when that was denied, they're not taking no for an answer. Essentially, they're going and saying, okay, fine. If that's not an option, then we're going to achieve our goals some other way.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. They were not only tenacious, but they were really great business people, it turns out. I mean, we tend to think about theater as being some sort of, kind of fly by the seat of your pants thing. But these guys, particularly with the sharer model that the Burbages and Shakespeare and the other sharers worked up, ended up doing just an amazing good amount of business because they were thinking ahead. They were planning. They were looking at what their options were. And, as a result, many of them ended up in a much better financial position than other theatrical practitioners at the time.
Do you think this level of strategy and essentially business sense is what made them different from people like John Lyall, who had tried this idea, but then essentially ended up filing bankruptcy? Is this sort of strategy, or is it tenacity, or why were Burbage and Shakespeare different from the other people that had tried to do this?
That's a good question. Yeah, I do. I think that it is this kind of awareness of business and practice and planning ahead and thinking about, in the same way that business leaders today do, thinking about what does the future hold? How do we make this work for us and really do the things that will keep this company afloat and will keep it going? Shakespeare was he loved a good suit and thought about money a lot. And it looks like even folks like Hemmings, who published the Folio with Condell, was the same way. And in some ways very stingy or even ugly about the way that they dealt with others financially. But it was to the benefit of the company and the strength of the company as they proceeded through their planning and their execution of the way that the Kingsmen operated and became so successful and so strong and lasted until the theater closures in 1642.
So with this new approach to the Blackfriars, are you saying it was successful pretty immediately?
The Blackfriars certainly was, yeah. And amazingly, the Globe and the Blackfriars together was this kind of force. Some companies didn't continue to operate both a private and a public playhouse, but the Globe group, the Kingsmen, did, and as a result, they had strong, solid relationships with folks from all classes. They were able to pull in money in the summer, in the winter. When the Globe burned down in 1613, they were able to rebuild it at twice what it had cost to build it the first time. So meaning putting more into it, probably highly decorated and perhaps more tapestries, things like that, that raised the experience of the audience. And that was in large part due to the ability that they had to continue to play because they had two theaters, and to the money that they made at the Blackfriars, which was multitudes more they could charge per ticket than they charged at the Globe.
Well, explain to us the difference between performing at the Blackfriars and performing at the Globe, because we've read that Shakespeare's plays, at least a few of them, and I'm thinking of Cymbeline in particular, might have actually been written to be performed at the Blackfriars as opposed to the Globe. So can you compare for us just briefly, what are the variations in staging or audience experience in the Blackfriars versus the Globe?
You know, that's an interesting question because there are some differences in the later plays. Certainly there's more spectacle in Cymbeline or in The Tempest or in The Winter's Tale that seem to work well for an indoor space. But the playing conditions, scholars think, are basically the same, so that we are looking at a room with galleries around a thrust stage with set doors and a discovery space with an above, with heavens, with hell. All of those things were available at both the Globe and the Blackfriars. But if anything, the Blackfriars may allow for a little bit, well, it does have artificial light in that it has candles. And it may also, because of windows and the ability that one has to shutter windows, been a thing that allowed them to perhaps even manipulate the light a little bit more. But I think that one of the things that I'm always interested in when I'm looking at any of Shakespeare's plays is how much was the company thinking about the way that the light just works anyway. So if you look at, I don't know, Romeo and Juliet, and you think about winter in England, and you think about where that play ends, and how at 2 p.m. the play is starting, by 4 p.m. it's pretty dark in London, then being in a tomb at the end with that creeping darkness just seems like almost designed, you know? We think about Shakespeare's company, oh, poor guys, they didn't have lights and they didn't have sets and all of that stuff. But I feel like the way that they used the world around them was just so intuitive that it enhanced the theatrical experience, whether or not it was an indoor space or an outdoor space.
The history of the Blackfriars definitely lends itself towards the guys having a reputation for taking any obstacles and turning them to their advantage, for sure. We have this marvelous replica of the Blackfriars at the American Shakespeare Center, and I believe it's the only one in the world. But it led me to wonder what happened to the original one.
Well, the theaters closed in 1642 by decree because basically the Puritans took over Parliament and all of that stuff. So we have the theaters basically not open anymore and being repurposed for other uses. I've heard it said that the Globe might have even been turned into apartments, but I'm curious about that because I read just a little while ago that the theater was also thinking about being turned into tenements. Anyway, everything on that side of London burned in 1666. So the Blackfriars building itself is no longer available. When I go to London, I always make an effort to get to the Blackfriars district and stand at least near where the Blackfriars stood. But it's not a place that we can actually visit or see or look at anymore because of the fire of London in 1666. You can walk there and walk to the Globe and pretend like you're living in the London of Shakespeare's day.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the Blackfriars that's there at the American Shakespeare Center, that's a fairly modern construction, at least when we think about, Shakespeare being almost 500 years ago. The one that we have now, how did the American Shakespeare Center know what to build? Who or what did you consult if it burnt down in 1666? Were there plans to reference, or even I'm thinking maybe there was woodcut art, or I don't know. How did they put this together and know that it was accurate?
We were very, very fortunate to have the support and resources from our friends at the Globe's recent experience of having completed their building in 1997. So when we began the process with our architect, Tom McLaughlin, in 2000, what he was doing was focusing on the same three things that the Globe researchers and practitioners look at. And that is, what can we learn from the text itself, from the plays? How do they inform our knowledge of how this building worked? And we're still learning from that. What can we learn from extant buildings, which buildings that existed in the period that are still standing today that may have been used for the same purpose? So we're talking like Middle Temple Hall, the Sheldonian at Oxford, places that had a similar function that we can draw from. And then what evidence is there in other resources? So what are the things that we can learn about from suits or deeds or anything like that? And we do have a few. There's actually a Blackfriars deed at the Folger Shakespeare in London, Folger Shakespeare Library, not in London, in Washington, D.C. And it's a very amazing piece of paper. The way that they wrote contracts and everything was just stunning. But that information we then take and we go over and evaluate and think about with scholars. And then you just kind of have to dive in and start putting the thing together. So we have raked seating at our Blackfriars, at our recreation of the indoor space, because the Sheldonian had raked seating. We know that there were boxes because in the period there was an altercation when a gallant was standing in front of a lord in a box, and he would not sit down so that the other patron could see. So that altercation and that suit actually gives us information that we would not have had otherwise. We did have interior dimensions as a result of some record of lease or deed. So we know how long the room was and how wide the room was. We had to make guesses about some things, and sometimes it was just a practical choice. For instance, while Andy Gurr supposes that the ceiling would not have been dropped, but would have gone all the way up to the point, as I think it does at Middle Temple Hall, we decided to put in a dropped ceiling, which would allow us to do a few things, including a trap door, but also store costumes and things like that we just needed the space to do. So there are times that we are still, thinking about the calls that we made, but we feel like if Shakespeare walked in, he would say, pretty close, not bad, and at least feel a little bit like he was kind of back at home in the Blackfriars.
That's fascinating. I keep a portrait of Shakespeare on my desk, and I ask similar questions. I look over at him and say, okay, Shakespeare, I just put this episode together. Does it, are you happy with how we've represented your history there? So I understand asking that question is a great source of guidance when you're putting something like this together. Well, for Shakespeareans who want to explore the history of the Blackfriars Theater, obviously one great way is to visit the reproduction housed at the American Shakespeare Center in Virginia. But in addition to that site and opportunity, what are some resources, either books or websites, that you would recommend we look at if we want to learn more about the history of this theater?
I have been perusing the Oxford Handbook of Early Modern Theater, which was put together by Richard Dutton. And it is a fantastic resource for anyone who's interested in early modern theaters. And I mean the actual physical structures and also how they worked. So it has like a section on the companies, which is very informative because the companies are influenced or part of the space. I'm going to find a quote to share with you in just a minute, but it's like the theater is the hardware for the software of the plays. And I think that was said, it was either said by Andy Gurr or Gabriel Egan, but the Handbook of Early Modern Theater is just a great resource with London playhouses, playing spaces, social practices, and then theatrical practices like lighting, music and sound properties, those kinds of things. So I highly recommend it. It has some of my very favorite scholars in it, with Astington, Tiffany Stern, David Kaufman, Dutton, and my boss, Ralph Cohen, actually wrote a part on the second Blackfriars Theater and its appeal. So it's a great resource.
Absolutely. We will check that out. Richard Dutton was actually a guest on That Shakespeare Life, so we will link, and he was talking to us about theaters, so we'll be sure to link to that as well. Now, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that is, what is the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I am to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare as well as a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
I'm really hoping there is a complete works of Jane Austen somewhere, because I would be very hard-pressed to choose which one I would take with me.
I'm sure there is.
So that would be my choice, although I did just finish reading Cass Morris's From Unseen Fire, and it's one of those books that I finished it on Tuesday night, and I wanted to immediately start it again. So that one is kind of itching at my brain right now, but definitely Jane Austen. And I have to put a little plug in. We just finished up a new adaptation of Emma here at the American Shakespeare Center, and absolutely loved it. It was adapted by Emma Whipday, who is at Shakespeare's Globe and one of the London colleges, and she would be a great guest for you to have on That Shakespeare Girl, because she is a Shakespeare girl.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, today, actually, this afternoon, we are hosting a group from the United States Department of Agriculture as we lead them in our Shakespeare and Leadership workshop, which is this very bizarre thing that came about in 2003 that we've just latched onto and grown. And I have such a good time with it because you get these folks in who don't think about Shakespeare at all and probably kind of dread it. And then we get to show them how Shakespeare works to show us great leadership, poor leadership, good storytelling, bad storytelling, and then how the tools that an actor brings to the stage can be a great way for them to improve their own leadership style. So it's always a fun thing. We also do something with cue scripts. I don't know if you are familiar with that. It's the way that actors received their text when Shakespeare was writing plays, because printing was an expensive proposition. Writing the whole play out for every single actor didn't make a lot of sense. So they just got their part and the few words that they were going to be listening for. And that as a tool for team building actually works really, really well, because you give everyone a different part and they have to figure out how does this come together, which means that they have to listen, they have to communicate, they have to work together. So I always have fun with those. And then we are just going great guns with our holiday season right now at the American Shakespeare Center, and that's always fun to see the hundreds of children trooping through the theater and seeing a show, probably many of them for the first time.
Wow. Oh, I'm sure that's beautiful and a magical time. Well, Sarah Enloe, Director of Education at the American Shakespeare Center, thank you so much for spending your time with us today and taking us back to look at the Blackfriars Theater. It's been fun talking with you.
My pleasure. It's great to talk to you too, Cassidy.
To hear all of the resources that Sarah talks about today, as well as to learn more about Sarah Enloe and the American Shakespeare Center, you can visit today's show notes. All of the links to the cool places and books and resources we mentioned can be found at CassidyCash.com/episode 39. That's CassidyCash.com/EP39. Would you like to meet me in England? In September 2019, I'm taking a group over with British History Tours to walk through the life of William Shakespeare. We'll be spending a couple of days in Stratford-upon-Avon, and then we'll travel over to London to see the Globe, where we'll have a private behind-the-scenes tour there, and we're hoping to get to see a play. And I want you to go with us. It would be amazing to get to meet you at all, but certainly to get to meet you in William Shakespeare's hometown would be amazing. Please consider traveling with us and get your early bird tickets while they last. There's still a few of them left, but we are only giving early bird tickets to the first 8 people who sign up. But you can still grab some of those and get all of the details about the trip at CassidyCash.com/travel Shakespeare. That's it for this week here at That Shakespeare Life. Until next time, I'm Cassidy Cash, That Shakespeare Girl, and I hope your week is a Shakespeare-filled week.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.